But what is the definition? Let's see how we're working here. Uh-oh.
Point
Not
it like
advancing.
at the computer.
Say it again.
If you point at the computer, it'll probably work.
Where's this? Might help if I know which way I'm going. Is it that way or that way? Best laid plans. Okay. Looks like we're working without our computer this time.
I promise I tested it.
Nope. All right, looks like we're going to wing it. Look, there it is. It's magic.
Okay.
Which one? This one? Okay. Cool. So, our definition of human trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services. Now, the part you want to pay attention to is the force, fraud, or coercion. These are the three things that, or one of these three things that needs to be in place for it to be called human trafficking legally. And the only exception to that is for someone who's under the age of 18. Now, basically, what this means, because it's a lot of legalese, basically means anything of value that is given, promised, received, directly or indirectly by another person in exchange for these services makes it human trafficking. There are two types of trafficking, two main types of human trafficking, which is sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Most people tend to be more interested in the sex trafficking, but labor trafficking is really quite prevalent, even though it's not. Let's just say it's very under prosecuted. So why are we so interested in human trafficking? We're interested in it because it's the fastest growing global criminal industry today. After drugs, trafficking is the second most lucrative business for organized crime. There are high profits, low risk, and a commodity that can be used over and over. And it now generates over $150 billion a year. When I first got involved with human trafficking, the issue, which was about in 2008, it was a $7 to $9 billion industry. A few years later, it was $32 billion, and now it's upwards of 150. That's how fast it's growing. And it's also very underreported. Increased international trade and competition creates a demand for cheap labor and higher profit margins. In the new global economy, there's a constant source of victims. Traffickers see them as dispensable commodities that are readily replaceable. And a lot of times when people think about trafficking, they think of someone who's thrown into the back of a van and people take off. And it's not that that doesn't happen, but very often trafficking victims are lured into their situation. There's a lot of different ways that that happens, and we'll go over that in just a minute. Although it can happen anywhere, it actually happens in all 50 states. But some of the places where it's most likely to happen: coastal regions, resort areas, places with growing populations, transitional populations, increased immigrant populations, and areas that have a close proximity to major corridors, like maybe I-95. Any of these things sound familiar? Now, professions where you might most likely come across human trafficking are, for sex trafficking, it's prostitution, obviously, escort services. Massage parlors are a place that aren't talked about a lot, but they are a big problem, especially in this area. Internet truck stops, brothels, exotic dancing, obviously pornography. Labor trafficking also takes place a lot in the service industries. We have restaurants, hotel, housekeeping, landscaping, nail salons. Any of those sound familiar? I think we have one or two of those around here. Construction work, maintenance. Some of the other places where we might find it is internet ads, and that's a biggie. Internet ads is one of the places where you'll find a lot of human trafficking or advertising for that taking place. But also places that you might not think about: domestic servitude, servile marriages, or catalog brides, rental properties, door-to-door sales, agricultural camps, factories and sweatshops. We don't have as many of those around here. But some of you have probably come across a traveling sales crews, or people that come up and knock at your door and try to sell you magazines. A lot of times they are made to make so much money before they can even go back at the end of the day. Also, another thing that's not always events. Sporting events are huge. The Olympics that's going on right now, unfortunately, anything like that, like World Cup, the Super Bowl, anything like that, those are havens for human trafficking, especially sex trafficking, to take place. And the Myrtle Beach Memorial Day Bike Fest tops the Super Bowl, believe it or not, in the percentage of ads that go out for sex trafficking. Actually tops the Super Bowl. It's hard to believe, but it is true. Now, there are a lot of different areas and a lot of different types of, there's a couple different types of destinations or countries. There are source countries, there are transitional countries, and there are destination countries. Unfortunately, the U.S. is all three. You can see by the map that trafficking takes place, and that they use actually a lot of the same avenues that they use for drugs and arms are the same avenues that they use for sex trafficking and labor trafficking as well. You know, we don't always think about this happening, or if we do think about it, we always think about it as being like in a third world country. But it's happening here. It's happening in all 50 of our states. It's not just happening in low rent areas. It happens in very wealthy neighborhoods. It could be happening right down the street from you right now. A lot of people, especially in this new day and age, we tend to get very busy in our lives, and we don't always pay attention to things that are going on around us. In fact, a lot of times we don't even take the time to get to know our neighbors anymore. And very often, it can be happening right down the street from us, and we don't even realize it. I know of some very nice neighborhoods where there are people coming and going all the time, and a lot of the neighbors are questioning what's going on, and the police say, oh, yeah, we know about that, but, you know, sometimes then nothing really happens, and it just goes on, and meanwhile, people are being victimized. You know, and sometimes people think that, you know, I've had people come up to me, older people sometimes, that'll say, you know, I'm really interested in this, but I don't really know what to do. And I say, well, you know what? Sometimes our older population are some of the better people to talk to, because more often than not, if you go into most neighborhoods, it's the older folks that live there that know more about what's going on in the neighborhood than most of the young people. Most of the young people are going about their lives, and they have all kinds of things going on, and they're just not paying attention to what's going on. But a lot of times it's the older folks that watch and they know, and they talk to people, and they know what's going on. Sometimes you might think that that's not something that can go on here. We had a case here in Conway, actually, that happened a few years back. There was a black man who was mentally challenged, who had been working at a restaurant for a family that owned the restaurant, and they would have him do work for them, and they would pay him a decent wage. But then the parents of that restaurant passed away, and the younger members of the family, or one of them in particular, took over the restaurant, and he decided it wasn't necessary to pay this guy anymore. But he forced him to keep working, and he would work him 12-hour days or longer, and if he complained, he would beat him. And this went on for several years, where this guy was being held captive, basically, and being made to work for nothing, and was being abused all the while. These are the kind of things that we need to pay attention to. This is the reason why we need to educate ourselves about human trafficking and what it is, and what sorts of things to look for. Because most of the time, people who are victims of human trafficking don't know they're victims of human trafficking. More often than not, they think that they've got, when I was saying that a lot of times people get lured into a situation, sometimes they think that they're going to be finding better employment, or they're going to be, going for, some new opportunity where they make things sound really good, and then the person gets there and it's not at all what was advertised. And they think, the person themselves might think, I just made some really stupid decisions. But what they don't realize is very often those people have been manipulated from the very beginning. And that's one thing that traffickers are really good at, is manipulation. And they choose certain people, or they target certain people. And those are the people who then find themselves in these bad situations, and they just think that they just made bad decisions and there's nothing they can do about it, and they're just stuck with their lot, and they don't even realize that what is happening to them is against the law. So who is most vulnerable? 70-80% are women and girls. Young people who are oftentimes they're runaways. They're a very vulnerable group, and there are a lot of those in this country. Anyone who is economically challenged, immigrants, if they don't speak the language in particular, are easy prey. And J1 students, I don't know if you all are familiar with the J1 program here, you probably are. It's when most of the time in the summers, we have people that come here from all over the world, young people that come here to work. And they'll stay here through the summer and make money, and then sometimes they'll go travel a little bit around the country before they go home. But there are a lot of kids that come to the United States that get lost in the system, that don't go back home. Their parents don't know what happened to them. And there are also kids who come here who get targeted. There are certain people in this, even in our area, who are very familiar with the system of how the J1 program works. And they know exactly how to manipulate the system. They know exactly how to work against these kids and how to victimize them. Kids don't realize what's happening to them, or if they do realize what's happening, they try to report it. Very oftentimes, the companies that are in charge of overseeing them or who have sponsored them aren't here locally. They're only available by phone, and they try to get in touch with them through the phone, and sometimes there's this whole system that they have to go through, and if they're not familiar with the English language, which some of them are familiar, but even if you are familiar, they make it so that it's hard to get through to anybody. And we've talked to a lot of kids that are really taken advantage of here, and it's a real shame, and it's too bad that there's not better oversight in this program. It's a good program, it's a great idea, but we need to have better oversight. And there's a lot of societal factors, risk factors, lack of awareness of commercial sexual exploitation, family conflicts. Family conflicts is a big one too, especially in this area. I'm not sure if it's still true, but South Carolina is #1 in familial sexual exploitation. Now, what does that mean? That means that family members are basically pimping out members of their own family, their children, or their nieces, or their nephews. They'll trade them for rent, or for drugs, or alcohol, or whatever. But, you know, kids are vulnerable. They don't know how to fight back for something like this. You know, they have parents that they trust and people that they count on to be there for them, and these are the same people who then in turn exploit them. So it's good to pay attention, like I said, to what's going on, because these are very serious problems and it's happening every day. Now, some of the ways that traffickers will use, some of the tools, let's say, that they will use against their victims. Drugs is huge. Very often, especially with sexual exploitation, they will get the victims hooked on drugs, which makes them much easier to manipulate and to control. Psychological coercion is also a huge tool that traffickers use. They know just what buttons to push. Very often, too, you'll find young girls that are either, they could be runaways, or they might not be runaways, but they might be looking for someone to accept them. Teenage years are a very vulnerable time for kids, and that makes them ripe pickings for traffickers, because you'll get very often older people who will prey on them, who know exactly what they're looking for, that they know that they're looking for acceptance. Sometimes they go on the internet and they pretend to be someone else, like they'll pretend to be a 14-year-old boy talk to a 13-year-old girl, and it's really a 35-year-old man. And this is another problem that they fight all the time, that the law enforcement is always trying to look into that. But it can be difficult to find these people and to hunt them down, because the fact that it's over the internet, sometimes it makes it easy for them to hide. Taking documents, for instance, like we were talking about with the J1 program, taking their documents makes it very difficult for them to change their situation, because if they've got their documents, They can't move, they can't change jobs, they can't do anything because they don't have their documents with them. And they say they're keeping them for safekeeping, but we know better. Very often, like I was saying, the boyfriend syndrome, lured in by someone older. Sometimes once they are taken into custody of sorts, they will isolate them. Isolation is also a very important tool that they use. The traffickers will isolate their victims, cut them off from their family, from their friends, from any support system that they have, and that, again, makes it very easy for them to manipulate these people. Rape, torture, beatings, starvation, these are all different tools that they use, and they're all very effective in keeping people under control. The National Polaris Project is a nationally funded project that takes in data about human trafficking all over the country. When I first got involved with the human trafficking issue, South Carolina was considered one of the dirty dozen, which was a dozen states that they considered were basically not paying attention to what human trafficking was or that it was going on. And so with the help of some other people, a group of people got together and we changed legislation. When I got involved, I think the legislation was like 2 sentences. I mean, it was basically non-existent and so completely vague that it was useless. But we've been able to change the legislation so that we have now one of the most comprehensive laws on the books, and we are now one of the most improved states, and we have a really good rating for that. So that's a great big step forward that we've taken. We've also helped to get, with that legislation that we changed, we mandated that there would be a South Carolina state task force formed, which has happened, and now we have regional task forces around the state, and it all works under the umbrella of the state task force, and a lot of really good things, and they're bringing together a lot of good people and good organizations and entities, law enforcement, NGOs, just all different types of groups. Some of them are mandated, some of them are not, but they've really brought together a great group so that they have now a system in place so that when they get a human trafficking call, they know who to call, they know how it's supposed to move through the system, they can get the victims the help that they need, and that's extremely important. So, the 2 main reasons for human trafficking exists: greed and demand. And as long as those 2 things exist, human trafficking will exist. But that doesn't mean we stop trying to fight it. It just means we have to get at the root causes of it. So who engages in human trafficking? Who are the perpetrators? Well, that can be anybody from a mom and pop family or operations, which oftentimes will involve extended family and so forth. It can be independently owned businesses, subcontractors. Oftentimes the smugglers work in conjunction with the traffickers. Now you have to understand too that smuggling and trafficking are 2 different things. Smuggling is a crime against the state. Trafficking is a crime against the person. But they very often work hand in hand, and one will hand them off to the other. We also, in some cases, will have individuals. I mean, we've all heard about some of the more publicized cases where someone kidnapped girls and locked them in their basement for 8, 10 years, sometimes longer, and the people next door didn't even know what was going on. They were in the basement for 10 years. The guy didn't live in the house, But he would bring breakfast every morning, and people would see him coming in with his bags of food. But nobody ever thought, gee, there's nobody in there. Why is he bringing all this food? He would even have barbecues. This one guy in Cleveland, he had barbecues in the backyard while these girls were being chained down in the basement. It can happen anywhere, to anyone. Fighting human trafficking requires a comprehensive, systematic, and determined response. Now, what does that mean? That means that it's going to take everybody. It means we have to get law enforcement. It means we have to get NGOs involved. It means we have to get faith-based groups involved. Organizations. Any organization that you belong to, you can bring this as an issue, and you can work together to help fight it. Even just individually, just educating yourself so that you know what's going on and you're more aware. Because the more you educate yourself about it, when you see it, things will start to click in your brain. I always tell people, when you come across a situation that just doesn't seem right, where you get that kind of feeling in your gut and something just doesn't seem right, it's probably not right. Because sometimes those are subliminal messages that your brain is sending to you, and it's like, that just looks weird. There's just something that's really off about that situation. Pay attention. The next time that happens to you, pay attention. And another thing I tell people is, it is so much better to suspect something is going on and to call somebody than to not call somebody. It's much better to call somebody and be wrong. People will understand. Trust me, they will understand that something, if you call the police or call the authorities and you say, I just saw this, get a license plate, whatever. Don't get too involved or too close or too up in their face, because this is their livelihood. So you don't want to approach them personally necessarily, because that could be dangerous. So I'm not advocating that you do that. I'm just saying, pay attention. Use your phone like you're talking on it. Take a picture if you can. Take a picture of the license or the person or whatever situation is. And they can always follow up on it. But it's so much better to call and be wrong than to not call and then think to yourself later, God, that could have been something and I didn't do anything. I could have stopped it.
Give some examples of what you would be looking for. Say if you're in a Walmart or something, like what are some real concrete things that you would look for?
Well, if you were in a Walmart, for instance, say you come across a group of women who come in with one guy or two guys that are overseeing them, and they're kind of watching what they do, and they're taking, or even a doctor's office, same situation, where you have one guy and he'll bring in maybe 2 or 3 girls. That's an odd situation. Because sometimes they'll take them out shopping, but they always have an overseer. They always have someone who's kind of taking charge over top of them. Nail salons or places that you go in on a regular basis, or even hotel housekeeping. If people won't look at you in the face, or they have their head down, they're afraid to talk to you, they seem skittish or afraid, or you see bruises or markings on them that are weird, and I know a lot of people have tattoos now, but that is a way that a lot of times that traffickers will mark their property, and they mark their territory. So these are all things that you want to look for. If you talk to someone maybe that's working in a restaurant that doesn't seem to be aware of their surroundings, or maybe don't know what city they're in, or don't, they just seem, we often, my husband and I, when we go out to eat, oftentimes will engage our waiters and waitresses in conversation. They always find that odd, and they always really appreciate it because most of the time they're like non-existent to most people. You know, you go in, you sit down, you order, you don't even look up at them, you don't pay attention to who they are, and we all do that. We're all guilty of it. You know, you go grocery shopping, you know, you don't pay attention to the people that are serving you very often. And I'm just saying, pay closer attention. If someone seems afraid or withdrawn, or they're afraid to talk to you, or they won't even look up at you, you know, just try to engage them in conversation. If you can do that, you might ask them, you know, where are you from? You know, sometimes people get moved around. Not always, but some trafficking victims get moved around because when law enforcement starts to hone in on them, they just move them to the next city. They have networks. Sometimes they have networks all set up. Like there was a case that they did a few years back that involved Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, where they were moving them all around, and they would go from place to place, and half the time, I think some of these people didn't even know where they were. So those are the kind of things that you can ask questions or just pay attention a little bit, and sometimes you'd be surprised what you notice. Now, one thing that we did do, or that the government did, was they passed the TVPA, which is the Trafficking Victim Protection Act. And that happened back in 2000. And they have been updating the law every few years. And they have really come a long way with the legislation and the prosecution and the victims, advocates, and what's the word I'm looking for? Restitution for the victims. So they have really helped a lot with the legislation. South Carolina has done a lot with its legislation. But you still need to implement it. Sometimes even though something looks good on paper, it still needs to be implemented, and the wheels and the cogs all have to work together smoothly, and it doesn't always happen. And it's always a work in progress. But it is something that is always improving, and they find more resources for the victims. When they find the victims, very often they only have the clothes on their back. Because one of the things that they'll do is they'll strip them of all their personal belongings so that they don't have anything to hang on to. And so when they find victims, they need basic necessities. They need medical help. They need mental help, mental therapy sometimes. You know, just the basics. You know, sometimes we'll do coordination of donations of toiletries, and we'll put together little bags of toiletries together so that we can hand those out to victims when they need it. I mean, they're little things, but they mean a lot to the victims, to the people that are most in need. South Carolina Human Trafficking Task Force. And ECAT was established back in 2008. We were actually the first nonprofit in South Carolina to fight human trafficking, so we're kind of proud of that. Didn't even realize it at the time. Didn't find that out till years later. But that was kind of cool, and it made me feel good that we were at least a small part in helping to move the situation in the right direction. Because it was funny, one of the first group educational things that I did, I had a lady come in from Florida that had been working at this for a while, and she had a map that showed where human trafficking was most prevalent. It was like Florida and Georgia, and it kind of stopped, and it went around South Carolina, up to North Carolina, and on up the coast, and I was like, wow, that's cool. They're just leaving South Carolina alone. And she kind of looked at me and laughed, and she was like, nah, South Carolina's just got their head in the sand. They have no idea what human trafficking is, or that it's even existing, And it's like they're not even collecting the data so they can be on the map. And that's what was happening back in 2008. It wasn't even on the radar. And I remember talking to law enforcement when I first got involved in the issue and asked them about human trafficking. And they said, "What? Human trafficking? No, we don't have that going on." And what is that again? I was like, wow. And then I talked to people who were out in the field, who went out into the communities, the Catholic Charities and people like that who were out and about amongst the people. And I asked them about human trafficking. "Oh yeah, we have it here. Oh yeah, it's going on all the time. Oh yeah, we see it every day." I was like, wow, there's a real disconnect there. You know, it was like the people who actually were in the trenches knew that it was going on. Law enforcement, they were completely clueless. They had no idea that it was going on and that it was happening right under their noses. So that was one of the first things that we had to set out to do, was to help to reach out to the law enforcement, to educate them, and to connect them to each other so that they could talk. And that's a difficult thing. That's one of the hardest things of, even with the task force, is a lot of the law enforcement agencies are more territorial, and they don't always, and sometimes can't, because of the restrictions that they're under, can't communicate with the other law enforcement entities. So that's a big part of what we're helping to try to help accomplish, is to get that communication, those lines of communication open. That's one thing that the task force has really helped a lot with, because they're intermediaries and there are different ways that they can help to facilitate that communication, because that really is key when you're trying to fight a crime that is as complicated as human trafficking, because it manifests itself in so many different ways. It's not like there's just one thing you can look for. As I showed you, there's so many different ways that someone can be trafficked, either sexually or through labor, that there's just not one thing to look for. There's a lot of different things. There's a lot of different ways it manifests itself, and it's just a matter of trying to stay on top of it and understand it and help facilitating having it be reported. Because like I said, more often than not, most trafficking victims don't know they're trafficking victims. And they almost never self-identify. Even when they're finally, taken into custody by someone who's trying to help them. No, I'm not a trafficking victim. That's my boyfriend. Meanwhile, the boyfriend's turning them out into the street, but they're so in love with this person, it's like they've got this boyfriend-daddy complex, and it's so messed with their mind, they don't even know that they're being victimized. So it depends on other people. It depends on everybody to pay attention, to be aware, and to say something.
If that happens, someone does that, and the police are called or they check out the situation, what happens in that situation if the girl or whoever says, "No, this is my boyfriend"?
Well, most law enforcement are getting trained now more to know what signs to look for, to know what questions to ask. That's a big part of it. Knowing what questions to ask and how to approach the situation makes a big difference. So that training is very important. And that's an ongoing thing. I mean, I know, like, again, when we first got started in this, law enforcement that we talked to were like, "They don't got to talk to us. They don't want to, And they were just like, dismissive about the whole thing. But then we would start to train them, and I can't tell you how many times law enforcement will come up to us after a training and say, "Wow, I didn't know that. I think I saw a trafficking situation last week. I'm going to go back and see if I can find," and sometimes they're gone. Sometimes they've come across a house that, again, where they knew something wasn't right, but they weren't quite sure and there weren't any obvious laws being broken. But I mean, there's also situations like, I had a situation down in Georgetown where they had girls being pimped out of a house in a local neighborhood. And the girls were like 13, 14 years old. And law enforcement responded, and they even asked them how old they were, and they told them. And they did nothing. And it was like, you want to be like, how can that happen?
I think that's what would make people afraid to even call or to do something. If you feel like this might end up being a fiasco, police come out and the girl goes, no, this is my boyfriend. This is really.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's always an iffy situation sometimes, but, you know, a lot of that goes back to the training. I mean, those officers obviously weren't trained because you can't be, you know, they knew what was happening, but they said it was okay. But if they had been trained, they would know that under 18, you can't consent to something like that. Yes?
Isn't that part of, like, you know, we're talking about the police, and this is what I don't understand. Isn't that part of their training when they're learning to be the police? I mean, like,
It is more now.
they're just not.
It is more now, but it wasn't years ago.
So you would go in there and train them, is what you're saying. They don't have any previous training, or they do?
Some of them did not. A lot of the ones that we came across did not, and we we offered it. We went to different cities like Myrtle Beach and Charleston and Hilton Head, and because those are 3 hot spots. And Horry County is the worst for the trafficking out of South Carolina. But those were 3 hot spots, and if you look at the number of calls and the number of cases that they have on a light map, you see those 3 spots right along the coast. And because that's the areas where it's most likely to happen. But we offered it to not just law enforcement, but first responders of all sorts, like, you know, firemen, you know, all different things, like emergency ambulance drivers, just the whole gamut.
That's where I think would really pay off, because people, they're going into situations.
Right.
And I think
Very often, yeah. Very often they go into situations and they don't even, you know, they don't realize at first what's happening. But the more that you talk to them about it, the more, like I said, those things will click with them when they do come across it, and they'll say, something's not right. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Say, for instance, your example for somebody coming into Walmart, like a single male with several women. Could you call, who would you call? Would you call that human trafficking hotline?
You could call the human trafficking hotline. You could go to the manager. You could call the police. There are several options that you could do.
What kind of details would the police be asking them if you saw something?
Just to try to remember what you saw and, you know, how many women were with him. I mean, that's just an unusual situation. I think most people understand that if they saw one guy come into Walmart and he had, you know, 10 women with him or whatever, that's just not something you're going to see every day. But it's, you know, I would probably go to manager first and try to make them aware of it, and then let them maybe call the police, and they'll have their cameras. Maybe they can be paying attention to what they have on their cameras, and, you know, so that they can make sure that they have that for the police when they do come, because they could be gone by the time they get there, but, you know, they could pay attention to, like, what vehicles they get into, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of things that you can do that you might not think about. Any other questions? Yes.
You said you work with the fire department, the DOT, the police department. Have you guys reached out to hotel management, for hotels, other areas, the area, to kind of train their employees to be aware of what to look for?
Yes. It helps too, even with hotel employees, to have them look out for stuff, because we have situations where, where they'll rent hotel rooms and then take the girls there, and then sometimes they'll advertise online, and sometimes they can track it down according to the decor of the hotel, and they can find out where that was.
So there's actually training for hotel
Oh, yeah.
managers?
Yeah. And there's actually a program for hotels, and it's not that prevalent in the United States. It's more prevalent overseas. It's called EPCAT, and it's like a 6-point program where they teach the employees and what to look for, and give them the training that's necessary. And then the hotels themselves, the corporate, usually will agree to this program and agree to post things in their rooms or on their property saying, that they are working against human trafficking. And it might, it's something that we need to get more hotels involved in. The research that I've done on it has shown that very few in the United States have really taken part in it. But it's a good program, and it's worldwide, but it's still in its infancy yet, I think. Yes? I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
You said that smuggling was a crime against the state,
Yes.
and trafficking is a crime against the person. What exactly does that mean?
When you smuggle something into the United States, it's a crime against our laws as a country.
So that thing is a person in this case, right?
Right.
Or is that a difference? Like trafficking is when humans and things are smuggled, actual items or...
Yes. So, well, people can be smuggled also, but ordinarily taking them across interstate or intercontinental lines would be a crime against that country, to take someone across those lines illegally.
That would be considered smuggled.
Right. Whereas trafficking is victimizing that person individually. Does that make sense?
When you talk about the group that went from Florida to Georgia to South Carolina and back, that's trafficking as opposed to smuggling?
Yes. I think Dark Night was the name of the process that they put together, the code name for it, where the different states, law enforcement in different states work together to make the prosecution happen. Yes.
When we were training people, if my memory serves me, didn't we spend a lot of energy with Myrtle Beach Airport and the whole J1
Yeah.
visa became so it's not just hotels. I mean, there's so many people that need to be trained. It's a massive undertaking.
It really is. And we had,
J1 visas were coming into the airports, and then this organization was helping to train people to spot it when it was trafficking.
yeah, because we wanted to put up posters and things so that young people who were being brought in through the airport could see that and know that there was help for them, but airport didn't really take to that idea, unfortunately. But it wasn't for lack of trying. Yes.
When you're talking about human trafficking and the labor part of it, at what point does it become illegal? Like you said, when do they get paid or they get used? What if they get paid, but it's barely even below minimum wage or rather minimum wage, and they're paid, they're not paid overtime. They're not, they're overworked.
Yeah, I mean, there can be gray areas with the labor and licensing laws, and that's one thing that I found interesting when we got more involved with the task force and so forth. That was something that they introduced into the mix, was the labor and licensing people, because the good thing about them is they can do spot checks. Whereas law enforcement, if they go into a place of business and wanting to look around, they have to have a good reason to do that. The labor and licensing people don't. They can just go in and check things out, and they don't have the restrictions on them that law enforcement does. So they're a really important key in that mix.
Would that phone number be the number to call, or would it be like a different department? Like a different?
What, the human trafficking?
Yeah, well, like, I just know with, like, the immigrant community, especially the documented immigrant community, a lot of them are.
I mean, you can report it to the police as well.
Right, so I feel like they don't report it because they're afraid, but a lot of times it's like, you know, they're still humans, and they're still overworked and not the overtime, so I feel like I've heard stories and I just don't know what to do.
Right.
Like, you know, if I were the police, what are they gonna do? So it's like, who do I tell them to call, or who do I call for them? So I didn't know if there was if that number would be the right number to call.
Yeah, I mean, I understand. It can be difficult sometimes to know, depending on the situation. You just kind of have to, use your best judgment. If it's someone that you think is being abused, or just, as far as the labor goes, you could call the police or call the LLR and see if they would respond to that. And, because very often they'll want to follow up on that. And there are situations like I was talking about earlier with the massage parlors. I know that there's a real issue with that in this area. And basically, most legitimate massage parlors have regular work hours. So if you come across a massage parlor that's open all through the night or late into the late hours of the night or morning, they're probably not legit. So, I mean, you just kind of have to look at the different situations, see what the situation is, and then make your best judgment. If you think it's sex trafficking, or if you're pretty sure that's what it is, then yeah, I would call the trafficking hotline. Yeah.
I'm just thinking about the universities. How is that affecting trafficking? Is there a lot of trafficking going on in universities?
Yeah, there's definitely some changes that have been going on in the universities. I know that we've had some issues with some of the local universities that have gotten involved with prostitution, and the young girls who go to school there who are doing this, some of them on purpose to make extra money. I don't know if you want to talk to that. Some of you've had more experience with that.
No, so I'm a victim advocate at the local university, and we're doing some training of our law enforcement officers and our security guards to look for the red flags with our students and educate the officers on how to ask those additional questions. Maybe it's something, maybe it's not, but our security guards need to be aware that if a distraught student approaches them, what to ask. Additionally, talking to group life on campus about the dangers of underage drinking, drink spiking. More than anything, we're seeing some problems come out of our local bars here on 544 that all of you are familiar with, probably.
Maybe.
On any given Friday night, you'll see about 200 people out in the parking lot. So just some general education about that. But as to hearing alarming things coming out of Coastal about victims of human trafficking, we are not. We rely a lot on our law enforcement partners to investigate those types of things, because typically they don't happen on our campus. They're happening in communities adjacent to campus.
Right. Very often that's true. I mean, basically you have to realize that, we think that slavery was abolished, except that we have more people living in slavery around the world right now than at any other time in our history. So you need to think about that. But I appreciate your letting me come and speak with you tonight. I hope I didn't go too terribly long. I think I did, but sorry about that. But are there any other questions, or, no? Yes.
The J1 employees that come in, just the young people that, well, it's usually, is it young people or is it just anybody from another country?
They're usually young people, usually 16 to 20, somewhere in that range.
Do they come with a job? So that
Yes, they're all supposed to have a job and a place to live set up before they get here.
And then who, is that employer kind of held responsible for checking in on these people? Or, I mean, don't they hold some sense of responsibility? If I used to work at a summer camp in the Poconos,
Right.
and our entire kitchen staff usually came from Poland. And they were a huge group of people.
Right.
You know, that were brought over together with the notion that they get weekends off and get to travel and things like
Right.
that. And, you know, and our employer was held responsible. Is that
They should be, and to some extent they are, but honestly, from the association that I've had with it, not at all the way I would like to see it done. Unfortunately, there are some employers in this area who are some of the ones who are victimizing the kids. They know how the system works. They know exactly how to manipulate the situation. There are some people that are working, they have connections overseas, they're getting money overseas, and they're coming over here and they're getting money over here. They're making sure that the kids are getting placed far away from where they work, and they're supposed to be within a close proximity so that they can either walk or bike to where they work. And so what they'll do, sometimes they'll manipulate them and make sure that they are living far away from where they're working, and then they offer them limousine service or Uber service, and they charge them through the nose for all of it from like every direction. And they're like making money every which way you look. And, you know, the problem is that by the time the kids catch on to what's going on, I mean, I'm telling you, there are people that have been here doing that for like 20 years. And we've tried to talk to people about it, and honestly, because a lot of it's connected to the chambers and stuff like that, they don't want to hear about it. But it's not a good situation, or let's just say it could. Some kids come over and they have a great experience, which is awesome. It's a great idea for them to be able to come over here and experience the United States. It's a good PR thing for us. But on the flip side, there's those kids that come here and are just preyed upon. And it's not always trafficking, but they are preyed upon, some of them, pretty badly. And they are put in situations, sometimes pretty horrible situations, and they don't see a way out of it. And sometimes they're afraid to say anything because the people who are doing it to them tell them they'll be deported and they'll never be allowed to come back again. You know, and a lot of these kids have like saved up forever to have the money to be able to come over here, because it's not inexpensive. But a lot of times their sponsors are like, for the kids who come here, are in Chicago. So they have no day-to-day interaction with these kids at all. And it's just not a good situation. And by the time if the kids get to the point where they want to report them, or they're talking to someone, maybe they'll get an advocate who, because there's a lot of them in this area, volunteers that will help. By the time they get to that point and they want to report them, by the time it goes through the system, they're already gone. And the people who are victimizing them know that. They know that nothing's going to happen in the short period of time that they're here. It takes months. And so by the time they figure out what's going on, and if they say anything to anybody, by the time it goes through the system, they're already back in their country, and they're not going to not going to come back and prosecute them or be a witness. So they're the ones who are doing the perpetrating are free and clear most of the time. Like I said, I know of some that have been doing it for 20 years. And it needs oversight. Because I've talked to the guy from the U.S. Attorney's Office that's supposed to be overseeing it, and I said, so what are you doing to help this situation? And I mean, I was telling him things he had no idea. And it was like, wow, aren't you supposed to be overseeing this? And it's like, yeah. I said, well, this stuff is happening. What are you going to do about it? Well, I don't know. And it was like, wow, okay. Not going to get anywhere with that one. I mean, it's government. Sorry, but government sometimes is not the best overseer of our lives.
Sorry, could the companies that bring them over, because they do it yearly, before they buy them,
I'm sorry, do they do what?
could they be monitored or licensed? I mean, every time you want to start a business, you have to be.
They should be. Most of the time what they do is they sit back and they're doing this. They're raking in the money.
In the paper, I think it was last year or the year before, where the same company kept bringing people in, young girls, and some of them from the Philippines. They were charging them so much for rent that their money didn't go very far, and they were putting 14 in a very small space, and they were sleeping on the floor.
Yeah, it was a deplorable situation, yeah. Another problem that they have that I talked to this guy about, which this is a little off subject, but is they marry the job to the residence where they're staying, and a lot of times the same person has their hand in both. And so they've got that person, so you don't like where you're living? Fine, you don't have a job anymore. I mean, here you've got somebody who's 18, they're halfway across the world in another country, barely know the language, and they get thrown out on the street, and that happens. So they're afraid to say anything, because if they don't like their job situation, they get thrown out of where they live. They don't like their living situation, they get thrown out of their job. And then they're, then what do they do?
Well, there are no embassies here.
Right.
Can't go to their.
So, I mean, it's not a good situation, and it really needs better oversight.
We'll have a little bit more time for questions at the end, but thank you, Kelly. We
Sorry.
appreciate you. But no, you're okay. All good information, good things that we can learn about. We do have a second part to this. We have Judge Buchanan here to do an interactive thing that you guys will do with her. So I will give her the microphone now. Okay. Well, we have a couple people watching online.
I think it's very interesting. I am the daughter of a pastor, God rest his soul, and he is in heaven watching me now thinking, oh my gosh, my daughter's standing in a pulpit. And he's either very proud or wondering, what is she going to say? But I am a family court judge here. My resident is Horry County, but I'm a statewide jurisdiction, so I travel all over the state and hold court. COVID has kind of cut that down a little bit, but my job in family court is we deal with juvenile sex trafficking. And so I am a member, I am the mentor and the member of the South Carolina, our region's Human Trafficking Task Force that falls under the South Carolina Human Trafficking Task Force with the Attorney General's Office. We have two other members of the task force here. We have Shelby O'Wiley and we have Beverly Willem. And they kind of got me involved. As a family court judge, I went to some training with other family court judges, and because I was just convinced we didn't have human trafficking in Horry County. And they kind of looked at me. And I said, no, I've never seen any. They've never come through my courtroom. And they were very accommodating and smiled, and they said, just wait. And then as we started to identifying what a victim is and how they are getting mischaracterized and how they are falling through the system, then I realized, okay, we do have it. We're just calling it something different. We need training. We need to find out what it is. And so we came back a little bit on fire to South Carolina and said, we're going to start this. And we learned an interactive program that I'm going to put y'all through. And what it is it puts you in the shoes of a girl that's being trafficked and to see the choices she has to make. Because I'm one of the judges, and I'm considered the tough judge for juveniles. All juveniles that come through hate to see me sitting there, because for the longest time I thought there's a black and there's a white. There's a good answer, there's a choice that they've made that's bad. But this showed me that there's not always a good answer and a bad answer when you've got a juvenile who doesn't have the same life experience that I have or that you may have. You've got a juvenile who's been abandoned. You've got a juvenile that is afraid. And you've got a juvenile who lives right down the hall from you and is being trafficked, and you don't know it. Because that happens a lot. I see when in my courtroom we have some that come through and we tag them runaways. I had one just a few weeks ago. The mother came in, child would run away, and that's a status offense. And in South Carolina, a status offense is something that an adult can't be charged with. So we have truancy, not going to school. We have runaway, can't charge an adult with runaway. And we have incorrigible. And so the most often thing we would see is runaway, especially down on the boulevard. They pick up a teenager, mama's not there, daddy's not there, they can't tell you where mom and daddy's at, well, they're a runaway. And so they'd end up in my courtroom. And I had this one little girl, and can y'all see me? I had this one little girl, and she kept running away, and mama would call the police to go pick her up. She'd bring her back home. Well, juvenile court in Horry County is on Tuesdays and Fridays, and so on a Friday I had this little girl, and her mama said, I can't keep her home, she keeps running. And I let her, we do an evaluation. And so you can do one of two ways of evaluation. You can let it be a community evaluation. They stay home and they go in and submit to the evaluation and meet with somebody, and they do their tests and stuff. Or I can send them off. I can send them a reception evaluation. They go off to off-site, and they stay for 45 days and come back. So that Friday, I let her go home. So we're going to do an evaluation. This was like her third or fourth time runaway. I'm like, we're going to do an evaluation, because usually with status offenses, we don't have to do an evaluation. That's not a violent crime. They're hurting themselves more than they're hurting anybody else, but that's not a violent crime. But I said, we're going to do a community evaluation. Well, that was Friday. Well, by Tuesday, she was detained again and back in my courtroom because she'd run away over the weekend. Now, I'm a woman of faith, and every morning, especially over my juvenile days, I pray and say, God, you show me what I can't see. And so that day, that woman was talking, and her story was different than what it was on Friday. And something just kind of piqued, and I said, I tell you what, you wouldn't stay home. I'm going to send you away for the evaluation. So I sent her, and the mama was standing, she was very upset, but the mama just wasn't making sense to me. And when that child got away from her mama and was in the evaluation center, her mama was the one trafficking her. She was running away to get away from her mother, who was selling her. And that came out when we took her out of the situation. And mama was selling her. She was running, and mama was using law enforcement to go get her and bring her back. And so it was, and this is not the first time I've had a mother selling their child in my courtroom. This is not the first time I've had a parent selling their child in my courtroom. And so we have, especially at the task force, we have increased the level of training for our officers to know what to look for, to know what to say. This program that we're going to do through the night, a lot of our local law enforcement officers have done this program. I had this gentleman from the Myrtle Beach City Police who works the boulevard came up to me and said, I'll never look at the runaway the same way again. Because that's what we have to increase, is the awareness to realize that there is a lot of sex trafficking going on, kids coming to this country and being sold, but there's a lot of it going on with the child down the hall. that you don't even realize your child could be susceptible. So how many grandparents we have in the room? How many knows a teenager? So you have the ability to find out if there's sex trafficking going on, because there are things you can look for. And I spoke at a local high school. We did the program at a local high school, and a mother came up to me, and she had her two teenage girls, and she said, I thought I was coming to hear that I had to hold my child's hand a little harder in Target, my 5-year-old. And she said, I didn't realize I don't think I have to worry about my 2 girls. And I said, you want me to show you how you have to worry about your 2 girls? And I looked at her daughter and I said, do you have a phone? And she said, yes, ma'am. Do you have Snapchat? Yes, ma'am. And I said, all right, scenario. You've got a group text going on, and they're all chatting, and they're all doing, and I said, and all of a sudden, somebody comes up with the idea, well, you take a picture of yours, I'll take a picture of mine. And I said, children do stupid stuff like that. They come in my courtroom a lot of times, and it's about pictures. And I said, she takes a picture that she knows if her mom and dad knew she took, she would die. And I said, she takes a picture. She sends it Snapchat. And the mama said, well, Snapchat disappears. And I pulled out my phone. I said, if I've got one phone and I get the Snapchat, and I got another phone that's got a camera on it, I take a picture of that Snapchat, I've got that picture on this phone, and it's not going to disappear. And then she said that finally, the person on the other end that she thinks is a girlfriend, or she thinks that somebody's her age, contacts her and says, if you don't meet me at this point in time, or if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to show your mama and your daddy and your friends, and I'm going to put it on social media, your picture. And her daughter, she looked around at her daughter, and one daughter said, Mom, I think I'd tell you. I think I would tell you. Her other daughter said, I wouldn't. They'd have me. She said, because I couldn't do that to you and Daddy. She was a straight-A honor roll student. That is not the poster child for sex trafficking, but she's that vulnerable. And so I encourage, when I talk to parents, and if you got grandchildren, you talk to your children about their children, you need to get in their business. You need to know their password. You need to know, a poor teenager back here is probably saying, oh my God, what's my mama listening to? But you need to get in their business. There should not be a password of social media that you can't get into for your child, because it happens. We did this to a youth group over in Conway, and at the end of the day, and all the kids were kind of laughing, joking, and kind of giggling and looking where their friend went and what their friend do. And at the end of it, a 12-year-old came up and told the youth leader, this is happening to me. She was being groomed. And she lived with her grandmother. Her grandmother had no idea. And at that point, we were able to get Sherry Smith, who's a captain with the Horry County Sheriff's Department, who's our president or director or chair of the task force, who was able to get in. So there are ways. If you see something, you can call the task force. You can call the sheriff's office, because there are things to look for. And it made me more aware. I was riding down I-20 the other day coming back from Columbia, and stopped, truck stop, kind of big old pilot thing, and went in to use the restroom. And on the back of the door it says, help me, I'm being sold. And she gave a number. Well, now I had no idea. I had no idea, is this legitimate, is it not? Because, as my grandma said, your old fella must be poor if he has to write your name on a poop house door, because you know how people used to go around and write their names on. And so, but I took a picture of it. I sent it to the sheriff's office, to Sherry Smith, and I said, don't know about this. But it took 2 seconds of my time. And she took it from there. So even if you see something and go, I don't know about this, don't worry about being a busybody. Because there's children out there that need you to be a busybody. If you see something that looks out of the ordinary for you to a child that you know, be a busybody. As we say on the task force, if you see it, say it. And don't feel bad about it. Because I've had more people come through my court system because a nosy neighbor made a phone call about a child suddenly acting different, not going to school like they're supposed to, not playing out in the yard anymore, watching things. And so that's how we are going to protect our children. And if you've got a child, being in their business. I have a child, he just graduated high school, but when he got his cell phone, an iPhone, we shared a cloud. And his thing was, Mama, do you think everybody else's mama's in their cloud? I don't care what everybody else's mama. I check it. And my son would say, and I'd look at his text messages, and my son would say, somebody would have an off-color word, and he'd say, don't talk bad on this thing. My mama reads this stuff. But they need to know, because somebody that is in a child's business makes that child less of a target, because the perpetrators out there don't want a child who there's somebody looking after and looking over. Because there's too many children out there that don't have that, so they're just going to the next one. And so we need to create a culture that we are a community that looks out for our kids. And while there is a ton of human trafficking going from one border to the next and one country to the next, there's so much of it going on here. And my passion is for the children in my community, because to me, if I start it and I spread it to you guys, you know people. Now, you can listen to me about 5 minutes and know where I'm from, but I'm sure that there's a lot of you that are not from here, and you got family elsewhere. And you can make a phone call and go, are you in my granddaughter's cloud? Are you checking behind her? Because one of the youth pastors who told me one time, I'm so into my daughter's business, she called me up a couple of months after we presented the program at her church, and she said, I'm so upset. Her child, 13 years old, was online playing a game. And somebody came in and got one of those emoji things and got into the game with her. And then convinced her, let's go into a private chat room. And then that person walked that child through setting up a tremendously hard firewall to break. But she noticed things going on with her child. She got in her child's room and found her journal. And found out this child was talking to somebody who she thought was her boyfriend, 16 years old. She took her computer, because she said, I took her phone away from her. She said, then I was like, the only computer she's on is mine, and that's for school. She took it into the IT person at her job, and they found a firewall that there was no way that 13-year-old could have set up without help. And then she found the communications. The child was trying to convince her to take their mother-daughter trip to California. That man was already arranging to pick up that child in California. So they are brave, they are brazen, and they are bold. And it's not a situation, because that woman told me this in tears, and she said, when you came to my church, she said, I kept thinking about all the other kids out there. She said, it never once dawned on me it could be my child. And so my poor child, he's 18, he's going to start at Coastal this year, but every time I would do one of these things over the last few years, and I'd come home and I'd look at him and I'm like, we need to talk. Mama, I'm good. Because it makes a difference. But the program that we're going to go through tonight, if you'll give me a little bit of your time and attention, and I appreciate it, I don't want to try to keep it too long, but you're going to be in the role of a 14-year-old girl. If you got a little pack of the green blue chips, if you did not, raise your hand. Miss Beverly, my Vanna White for the night, is going to bring them to you. So if you need a pack, raise your hand. Now, if y'all don't mind, when you take off your paper clips, we don't want to mess up this beautiful sanctuary with paper clips all over the floor. So I have brought my handy dandy, well, I would say it was Tupperware, but I didn't spend that much money on it. This is a Beneful dog bowl that I've recycled. So if you could drop them in there so we can make sure that we don't have it. So if everybody's got this, we're going to start a program, and it's called Stay or Go. And you're going to make some decisions about staying or going different places that some kids have options to go to. Now, your choices of places that you can choose tonight, we have an aunt and uncle's home, and you are Brenda, a 15-year-old girl currently living with her aunt and uncle because her mother's passed away and her dad is in jail for abusing her. So aunt and uncle is her DSS family protector placement. Now, as you look at your little pack of blue and green, what the blue tickets mean is goodwill. Because a lot of places you can go to in life, they're not going to charge you to stay there, but if they're letting you stay for free, you're getting goodwill. Everything costs something. Even if it costs you nothing, it costs you goodwill of somebody being neighborly, charitable. If you got a green ticket, that's money, because some places you go is going to cost you some money. And so as you go to each one of these places that are choices to go to, it's going to tell you in the pouch how many tickets it's going to cost you and what kind of tickets it's going to cost you. Because when a child is having to make a decision, if they're out on the street and they go somewhere, it might cost them goodwill. Or it might cost them some money. And if they don't have that, it might be out on the street that they find themselves. Or put in a situation to go back somewhere that might be the lesser of the evils. So we can't make it easy for you. You got to decide if you're going to use goodwill or money, or even if you don't have any of that to use. So we have Aunt and Uncle's house. This is your foster care placement. It does not cost you any money to stay there, but it costs you goodwill. You have Mike's house. This is your new boyfriend. It costs you nothing to stay there. No goodwill, no money. You have a women's shelter, and that's right here. And usually we put these on the walls, but I didn't want to mess up the walls. So what I would ask you to do is when you decide to go to the women's shelter, if you will stick your blue ticket in there and then slide down and sit down, and everybody at the women's shelter will be sitting along this pew and the pew behind it. And the ones that are, we've got a friend's house, we have homeless, and we have a hotel, and then we have a homeless shelter as well. So when you find a place to go, stick your ticket in there, slide along. But if you get to the place and go, I don't have the right ticket for there, you can't stay there. You have to go somewhere else. So we have a woman's shelter, and this shelter does not charge you any money to stay there, but extends goodwill to women who need a place to stay. They will not allow anyone younger than 18 to stay in their facility, but sometimes they don't check for ID. They will only allow you to stay for a short period of time. Then you have to leave. Shelter, which does not charge for someone to stay there and does not require identification. The shelter is first come, first served to stay on a daily basis, and the occupants are both male and female, not the safest place to stay. You have a friend's house, and your friend has her own one-bedroom apartment and a job to support herself. She quit school last year. But she can be a resource for a short period of time, but not long-term. She does not have much money, and all that she has goes into her rent, utilities, and food. And she says you have to pay for your own food. And then we have a hotel. Much like some of the hotels down on the boulevard that might not be at full capacity, the hotel costs much you may not have. However, the owner is sympathetic to young people in tough situations and sometimes will allow them to stay for free or at a reduced rate depending upon the occupancy. So now we're going to start this program. Now, one thing we ask you to do is remain quiet. Don't talk to one another. Because this is a situation where you got to make your own decision. Don't buddy up. And decide, because when I went through this program, I'm not a person that stays quiet easily. And a little lady from India was conducting the program, and she says, if you talk, I will shoosh you. And so I got shooshed about 5 times. But I'll shoosh you. But just be thoughtful about where you're going. And let's do it in silence. So everybody at this time, we're going to start the program. And if I could have everybody crowd around the aunt and uncle's house. You can stand or you can sit if you wish to. Oh, look at y'all. Y'all so good. Bring that. I feel like I'm holding the offering plate. I know. Thank you. Sure, sure. Okay. Okay, you are Brenda, a 15-year-old girl currently living with her aunt, uncle, and a female cousin who's 2 years younger than you. Your mother's deceased, and your father just went to jail for physically abusing you. The South Carolina Department of Social Services placed you with your aunt and uncle as protectors in the case against your father. The case has not yet been closed with DSS, but you have not seen your guardian or your caseworker for a while. You have been living with your aunt and uncle for approximately 4 months. You get to stay in the same school with your friends, which is good, and you are very, very close with your cousin. One night, after you've been there for a few months, your uncle taps on your door and walks into your room after everyone has gone to sleep. There are no locks on the doors. He lays down on your bed with you and touches you under your nightgown. He tells you that he just wants to lay next to you and that you owe him because he's letting you stay in his house for free. You are terrified, but you say nothing. You have nowhere else to go, and you are afraid of what will happen if you tell someone. He leaves after a few minutes. But this starts to become a habit, and he comes into your room each evening, and he gets more and more aggressive. You're afraid to go to sleep. You finally break down and tell your aunt, and she calls you a liar. She knows you're lying on your uncle. She threatens that if you tell anyone else this lie, she will call DSS and have you removed from her house and put in a home with strangers with foster parents. You say nothing else. You have a social media account and you receive an instant message from a guy named Mike that you've never met before. He tells you that he's seen you around and that you're so pretty, and he asks to be your friend and be a follower. And you accept his friend request and you start instant messaging with him. You give him your phone number and he starts sending you pictures via Snapchat. He's so funny, and oh my gosh, he's so cute. It makes you feel good that someone like him is giving you some attention. Every day he compliments you and tells you how wonderful you are, how cute you are, how sweet you are. And then he starts to really ask you about what's going on in your life. Who you live with, what kind of relationship you have with them. He asks about your family, and you tell him about your uncle. He acts like he's just mad about that, and that makes you feel even more special. One day, he asks you to meet him face to face, and you are thrilled, and you do. You meet him at a fast food restaurant. He buys you dinner. He asks you more questions about his life, about your life. You tell him more about your mother, father, and about what your uncle's doing. And then he offers you a way out. He tells you that you can come stay at his house. He has his own place. He has a few roommates. And that you can get away from your uncle. And DSS won't find you. He will protect you. You are not sure to start with, but after a few days of gentle persuasion from Mike, you quietly pack up your things one night and leave the house. He meets you around the corner and takes you to his house. So if everybody could move to the back of the sanctuary to Mike's house. When you walk into Mike's house, you find that Mike has a couple of female roommates. You were relieved to find that there are no other guys there. He says you're his number one and that you're the most special to him. Everyone seems to get along, and you enjoy hanging out with Mike, and you are finally free of worrying about your uncle. You're going to school, you are going to school, but you do not do any schoolwork at Mike's house. You're falling behind in your schoolwork, and you're not hanging out with your old friends, but you're not worried. Nobody seems to notice. There's always beer and pot in the house, and everyone shares with everyone else. You're having a lot of fun. One day, Mike tells you that he needs some money, as his work is slow, and he's running short. He needs your help. And you agree because he's done so much for you. You love him. He says he can arrange for you to dance at a party, and you'll get paid for it. It won't be that big of a deal. So you tell him, okay, you like to dance. And he brings you a skimpy outfit home. And when the girls dress you up and put your makeup on, you barely recognize yourself. Mike takes you to a party, and you're dancing with a lot of different people. And then he pulls you to the side and tells you there's a one fellow that wants to get to know you a little bit better, and that you will make more money that way. You're not exactly sure what that means, but you trust Mike, and he wouldn't ask you to do anything bad or anything to hurt you. He says it will be a big help to him, and you say okay. So Mike introduces you to this guy and says you need to go somewhere private with him because it's so loud at the party. So you follow them out of the room. The guy takes you into a room with a bed and starts to undress you. You're shocked and afraid of what he's doing, but you're worried about telling him no because Mike might get mad at you. You decide to go along with it, telling yourself it will be just this one time, even though you're afraid because you've never done it before. After it's over, you go back out of the room, and Mike is there waiting on you. He smiles at you and says, let's go. Mike takes you home and gives you $20, telling you that you are amazing. You were upset about what happened, but glad that you made Mike happy. That night became a turning point for you as you could not forget what happened. You are only going to school some of the time. No one at school has caught on that you are not living with your aunt and uncle. No one from your family notices. You've not heard from your grandmother. Your friends at school know something's wrong, but they don't bother you about it. You feel very alone. A few days after the first party, Mike comes to you and says that he needs you to go on a date with another friend of his. You've seen the other girls go out on dates, so you think it should be okay. And once again, you're taken to a room, left there by Mike, and you are forced to do something that you do not want to do. Mike walks in a few minutes later and tells you, let's go. He tells you he's proud of you. He takes you out to eat. He gives you $20. That begins a series of nights of going out where Mike has arranged dates for you. When you say you don't want to, he reminds that you have nowhere else to go. You can't go back to your aunt and uncle's house. And if you tell anyone what's going on, you could end up at DJJ because you're breaking the law. This terrifies you. You are tired and you stop going to school regularly. Sometimes you just go to school to get away from the house where Mike and the other girls are. Mike doesn't like for you to leave the house, but you tell him if you don't go to school, someone could report you. So at least you can get away for a little while. You don't eat or sleep much anymore. Sometimes you do not want to go out, but Mike grabs your arm really hard and leaves a bruise where no one can see. He tells you that he knows how to leave marks like that all over you. You're scared now. You want to leave. You don't like doing things with the strange men you have to meet each week. You constantly think about where you can go. Is it time to go? So at this point, if you want to stay at Mike's house, stay there. If you want to go, find another place to go. We have a hotel, a homeless shelter, women's shelter, friend's house, back to aunt and uncle's. So if you want to go, now's the time to move and then deposit a ticket. And y'all just slide in and have a seat on the pew. If you stay at the women's shelter, just slide in. Just keep the rest of your tickets. Just deposit whatever tickets required and then just slide in and have a seat in your location. Yeah, just have a seat behind there. For those of you who have left Mike's house, once he finds out you have left, he calls and texts you. The other girls are texting you constantly, asking you to come back. Eventually, Mike gets frustrated and threatens that he will call the police and say you are a runaway. If the police find you, you could go to juvie. You don't trust him, but you also don't want to go to jail. Then he switches his tone and is nice and tells you he misses you and that things will be okay. He loves you. He reminds you of the problems that you had at your aunt and uncle's house, and he will protect you from your uncle. He will also make sure that DSS will not find you to make you go back to their house. He tells you that there is no one you can trust, and he is the only one willing to take care of you. For those of you who have gone to the women's shelter, you are lucky because they did not ask for an ID. So they do not know how old you really are. You have to share a room with a few women who are very nosy and ask you a million questions. You caught one of them going through your stuff and found some things missing. Fortunately, you kept your phone and a little bit of money in your pocket, so she was not able to steal that. There is a male custodian that works at the shelter at odd hours because he's a volunteer. He has brushed up against you a few times and made off-color comments. You don't want to report his behavior because you are afraid they will ask you questions about yourself and ask for identification. You are on constant guard as you do not really feel safe. You do not want to be there. Are either of you going to leave? Okay. For those of you who go to a friend's house, your friend told you it was okay to stay on her couch for a couple of days and you're grateful for her help. She tells you her landlord who lives downstairs is very strict and she cannot have any trouble in the home. You promise you will be no trouble, but you are concerned about the constant calls from Mike telling you that he's going to find you and make you come home. You don't want him showing up at your friend's house and causing problems for you. You know he could hurt your friend if he came there. You are scared for your friend's safety. Do any of you want to leave? Okay. For those of you who are not at Mike's house, he has really stepped up his efforts to make you come back. One minute he's nice, the next minute he threatens you. When you tell him you're not coming back, he's furious and tells you he will find you and make you come back. You see where he is putting pretty bad posts about you all over social media, calling you very bad names. He tells you that you will not be safe anywhere you go because he's going to keep hunting you until he finds you. However, if you just come back home, then he will not be mad and things will be okay. For those of you who have gone to the homeless shelter, there are all kinds of people in the shelter. You have to get there early in the day to help to be able to stay, as it is a first come, first serve basis. You do not get to choose where you sleep or where you are near. There are some pretty sketchy people in the shelter, and people are saying some pretty crazy things to you. At the shelter, a couple of men have commented on how nice you look, and you try to avoid them. One man says he recognizes your picture from social media and he would like to sample the goods but has no money. Ask for a freebie. You are terrified. You go to bed with all of your clothes on, but you're afraid to go to sleep. You get up the next day and the night has been awful with no sleep. Are you staying? For those of you in the hotel, the managers let you stay there for a couple of days without making you pay full price. But now he tells you that you have to pay a regular rate or leave. If you stay at the hotel, deposit 2 green tickets. If you do not have enough green tickets, then you must leave the hotel. So deposit 2 green tickets or leave the hotel and find someplace else to go. For those of you at the women's shelter, your time is up. They will only allow women to stay for a few days at a time. After their time limit, you must leave and stay gone for at least 48 hours before you can come back. You're worried because you know if your spot is taken while you're gone and the shelter is full when you come back, you cannot go back in. Those at the women's shelter must leave now and go somewhere else. Find another place to go that you have the tickets to stay at. You put all your tickets in there, let me give you another pack. Miss Shelby will give you another pack of tickets. Now just deposit the amount it tells you now. We got homeless, we got shelter, hotel, aunt and uncle, or the friend's house. Or you can always go back to Mike's. Okay. For those of you at your friend's house, the worst has happened. Mike has found you at your friend's house. He showed up banging on the door and yelling for you to open the door. Fortunately, your friend was at work, but the landlord heard everything. The landlord yelled out from his apartment that he was calling the police, which caused Mike to leave. You are now afraid because Mike knows where you are and you know he will be back. He has called and messaged you constantly, telling you that he will be back and will hurt your friend if you do not come back with him. You tell her what's going on and she's scared. She tells you that you can no longer stay there. So if you're at a friend's house, you've got to leave and go somewhere else. And the friend's house is no longer an option. That's the women's shelter. There's the homeless shelters up front. Or you can always go back to Mike's house. For those of you who are homeless on the street, you hear there's a bad storm coming. You watched a weather report on a TV at a convenience store where you bought a bag of chips for dinner. The people on the news say that everyone should seek shelter because the storm is going to be dangerous. You are scared because you don't know where you're going to go. You figured that a bad place is better than being outside, so you have to go somewhere as you have no way to stay out of the storm. So if you're homeless, you got to find somewhere else to go that you can put tickets in. You could go to Mike's house, you could go to Aunt and Uncle's house, you could go to the shelter or the hotel. For all of you at the women's shelter, what you feared has finally happened. You were in the bathroom and the volunteer custodian came after you. He attacked you. You screamed to the top of your lungs. A worker came in the room and the man ran out. The worker said she was calling the police. You begged her not to, but she insisted. You know if the police show up, they will want your ID and ask you questions. You don't want to answer. The women's shelter could get in trouble for letting you stay there. You have to run. So everybody at the women's shelter, find another place to go. A blue ticket for Aunt and Uncle's house. No tickets for Mike's house. For all of you, the storm has passed and you're at the park trying to find a quiet place and figure out what you're going to do. You are scared all of the time. You miss your mama so bad. And you don't know where a safe place is anymore. While you're sitting there in the park, a guy with a knife comes up to you and steals what little money you have. You are afraid to go to the police because then they will know you're a runaway. Mike told you what would happen if you ever talked to the police. Everyone needs to deposit all of the green tickets they have into the pouch of wherever they are now. And if the place you are at requires a green ticket, you must leave now and find another place that does not require money. So you have been robbed. Give up your green tickets. You can keep your blue tickets. Now find a place to go that does not require money. If you have a blue ticket, you can stay, but you give all your green tickets. You don't have any blue tickets, and you got to go somewhere else that doesn't require a blue ticket. Mike's house or homeless does not require a blue ticket. So are all y'all homeless now? You are now broke with no money at all. You have no idea what you're going to do. You are starving. You wander around the streets with what seems like no options, and while you are walking around, you get an instant message. One of your former dates, named Scott, has messaged you and wants to know if you would like to get together that night. You know what he's asking for, and you also know he will pay it. You also know that might allow you to eat or find a place to stay. If you decide to meet Scott, raise your hand, and each person that raises their hand gets 2 green tickets. Huh? No. If you want to meet Scott, raise your hand and get 2 green tickets. Now you can go anywhere that you can afford to go. Okay, you can't go to Women's Shelter Friends' house. They're closed. Okay, then you can still keep your money. Okay, Shelby, your little girl's raising her hand. For those of you not at Mike's house, it should be every one of you, Mike continues to contact you, cajole you, threaten you, tells you that if you do not come back to him, he's going to go after your cousin and make her his girlfriend, just like he did with you. This scares you because you love your cousin like a sister. You don't want him going after her. You know that she is not smart enough to stay away from him. You know how charming he can be. He tells you he knows where she lives and where she goes to school. So if you're not back at his house by the end of the night, he's going after her. What do you do? For those of you that are willing to go back to Mike's house, step back over to Mike's house. Or he's going after your cousin.
We have to be honest, right?
You have to be honest. Are you two in Mike's? Are y'all in Mike's house? Okay. So are y'all in Mike's house? Okay. Okay. For those of you at Mike's house, you are now going on dates each day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. Have a seat. You at Mike's house, we gonna work you. You are forced to do things with these men to keep Mike from getting mad and hitting you. You are staying high to get through each day, but you are miserable and you do not know how much more you can take. You cannot remember what it's like to be normal, and you don't have any friends anymore. from before Mike. One of the girls in the home gets too high one day on a date and dies in a motel room. You are terrified this is going to happen to you. You don't want to die, but you don't know where you can go. Do you stay or do you go? For those of you who are at your aunt and uncle's house, your aunt says she is now fed up with taking care of you. She is well aware that her husband comes into your bedroom almost every night now, and she's holding it against you. She accuses you of leading him on and calls you very bad names. She will not let you eat with the family any longer. She has stopped providing you with basic necessities. You pretty much stay in your room most of the time, but that gives your uncle easy access to you. Your aunt says that she will not have someone after her husband living under her roof. She tells you to get out of her house and don't come back. So if you're at aunt and uncle's house, you have to leave. If you're at the homeless shelter, those two men made good on their threat. You were asleep one night and was woken up by someone attacking you. You are terrified. You get up and you run. So if you're at the homeless shelter, you have to go. Now, it's just the shelter. You can still be homeless, but just the shelter. They're at the shelter. You are feeling sick a lot of the time now, and you don't know what is wrong with you. You are not eating regularly, and when you do eat, it's junk that won't stay down. You feel like you are in a fog all the time, and you have no idea what normal is anymore. You miss your mom. You miss your friends at school. One day, as you're sitting outside of a fast food restaurant trying to eat a burger that's making you sick, you think of something that you believe is impossible. You have not had your cycle in over 2 months. Your life has been in such an upheaval you didn't even notice. You go to a store, buy a pregnancy test, and the worst thing in the world has happened to you. The test is positive. What are you going to do now? And that ends the exercise. So if you could just deposit whatever tickets you got where you're at, and then y'all can come back over and have a seat and we'll discuss it. Now I will tell you this exercise was modeled after a young woman who was real. Thank you. This happens, this frustration, this fear is so real, and we see it all the time. We have little girls, we have guys down on the boulevard that go through this challenge. And so many people think, well, they just need to go home. Home could also be just as bad. Especially if, to me, it would be worse at home is where my mama's selling me or my daddy's selling me. And so sometimes this is the life of a victim. And so the exercise puts this into perspective because so many people have no idea. They're so far removed and they could not imagine what it would be like. Because in my mind, as a judge, and I'm sitting on the bench judging these people, and I'm thinking, well, just go home. Just do this. But when I was put through this exercise with a bunch of other judges, now I'll tell you, y'all are pretty good. We had a room full of judges, and when they had a chance to sell it and get some money, all those hands went up. And I made all the family court judges of South Carolina at our conference go through that program. And what was funny is some of our older gentlemen were standing there and they looked around, and they looked around. They kept their head down when they put their hand, because sometimes it's that much desperate. Eat or don't eat. That's what they face. And so that's why it's so important to us. And that's why it's so important to identify and how we can help. So in that program, and when we talk to teachers, there's people that are around these children all the time. Start looking for it. Like when you said a while ago, some things that can be looked for. And when I talk to the teachers, if that child comes in and can't make it through a class without falling asleep, If that child comes in as dirty, that child comes in high. Traffickers will brand their property. They'll brand them. So if you see an odd brand on them. So that's some of the things that people look for. Now, unfortunately, and we like to think about it in our mind, well, Brenda could never be my child, but Brenda could be your child. Brenda could be your male child. We had a situation where this young fellow was a football player. He got a text message from this girl that said, I saw you playing football. She said, you are so hot. He thinks he's conversing with the 19-year-old college student who sends him pictures. He sends pictures back. And after enough pictures were sent, the person on the other end of the phone said, I'm a 35-year-old man, and if you don't do such and such for me, I'm going to show all these pictures to your coach and your parents and your teammates of the pictures you've been sending to a 35-year-old man, 35-year-old gay man. He had that boy just like that. So the scenarios that we sit and think about, these people are doing so much. I attended one of the training seminars for law enforcement, and I just went as an observer, and they put up they put on a profile and sent it out. And they said, we'll see how many hits we get. I'm thinking I'm going to have to sit there for an hour or so to wait. Within 20 minutes, there were 200 hits for that one profile. What we can do as parents and as grandparents, communicate with your kids. Communicate with the kids that are in your life. Make sure somebody is communicating with the kids that are in your life. Because as I said before, children who have people that are in their business, knowing what's going on with them, showing care, concern, discipline, but keeping up with them. Dropping a child off at the mall, you'd be amazed at what happens at Coastal Grand Mall. It is rampant at Coastal Grand Mall. And you think, well, it's the mall. I dropped him off at the movies. I wouldn't let my child was 18 years old before I allowed him to go to the mall on his own. It's scary. But it's something we can combat. Any questions? After I've shocked you on anything that you would like to know. If you want to know about my system. And the thing about it is, too, I open my courtroom. I have a lot of people that come up and sit with me in court and sit and watch the system. And we all are about training. The thing that we are behind on is officer training because they don't have those programs in the police academy. I attended one of the state task force meetings in Columbia not too long ago, and we had somebody from SLED there, and they were saying we need to get this because it's not a program in the police academy. They're working on some curriculum to get in the police academy. But as I pointed out to them, I said, well, they're having to do continuing education. As a licensed attorney, I have to do continuing education every year to keep up with my education. Cops have to do the same thing. Law enforcement has to do the same thing. My husband's a game warden. He has to do that. I said, we need to make some of that and make it mandatory. So that's coming down the pike to get out there and educate the law enforcement because they're on the front lines. But it's also important to educate, as somebody was saying earlier, the people at the hotel. We had one, I always say not too long ago, but COVID has kind of given me a year break. But we had a young lady that they brought in pictures to me, and it was a DSS case. They brought in pictures. This child had been beat. There was probably not a spot on her body that big that did not have a bruise or a welt on it. And what had happened is her mother had given her to a man to go sell. Her mother was from Iowa. Do we have anybody from Iowa here? So I don't know if anybody from Iowa. Okay. Her mother was then contacted. This man brought her, we were the fourth state that girl had hit. In 30 days, from July 3rd until August, the first week of August, she had been in 4 states and had 40 customers. The customer that got her beat was in the Surfside Walmart parking lot in a truck, an 18-wheeler. And when she got out of the truck, something about the situation, he had tipped her. He gave her more money and told her to go buy herself something to eat. She was too skinny. But she gave it all to the pimp, who then accused her of doing something wrong, and she said, I didn't. And he beat her. While his girlfriend drove around, he beat her. Got back to the hotel. The hotel person at the front desk noticed the bruises, noticed the welts, and called law enforcement, who got there. And the pimp said, she's prostituting, but we got into a car wreck, but we were trying, well, they arrested her. She said she was 19. They got her to the hospital, so once she was away to the hospital, she told them, I'm 14. And this is what's been going on. Well, when they contacted her mama, the little girl said, don't call my mama. She's the one that gave me to him. Well, the mama comes and shows up in my courtroom on her probable cause hearing, which is something we do in DSS, demanding to have her child returned to her. Well, that didn't happen. And I was convinced because she came from Iowa. So I told somebody later, I said, I now know Iowa means idiots out wandering around. I said, because that woman was crazy. But she came in indignant. You got to turn my child back over to me. I said, ma'am, you're a sorry excuse for a mother. You will never get your child back if I can help it. So it happens around. It happens to the kids we know. It happens to the kids we don't. But becoming aware is what we're trying to do, is increase the awareness of people that come in contact with these children. So if you know a school teacher, say, look, you might want to get these people into school to teach, because we're working with a lot of schools to educate the teachers what to be aware of. We're working with youth groups, trying to get those people, anybody that a child trusts enough to talk to, or is savvy enough and aware enough and around them enough to recognize something's going on. That's who we're trying to educate. Because if we do too big a shot, we're going to miss some. So my goal is to educate grassroots up. People that deal with these children up. Now there's other people that educate higher above me, and we're all working. We're all different cogs in a wheel. But my goal is to educate those who can grow up, so that little precious thing right there will have a world that he'll never have to face it. Or she. He. I love the boys. Any questions? Any comments? What did y'all think about the program? It's scary. It's scary and it's real. That was based on a little girl that is real. She had no place to go. She was 15. And the end of I modified that a little bit when I did for my judges, because our judges didn't realize we had so much sex trafficking. And so when I did with the judges, I modified it and said, okay, they went to the aunt's house. Aunt said she ran away. They went and found her, picked her up. The school resource officer saw her at a fast food restaurant, picked her up. Now she's coming to court. Because we're challenging those people. Because judges, they come. Fortunately, we've done enough training with my people with DJJ, Department of Juvenile Justice, and the people in Horry County. They're picking them up before they get to me. But once they get to me, if I see, and they won't talk, so it's because some of these kids will not talk to you. They will not tell you anything. But it's funny how they change their attitude when they're in front of a judge. I can be very scary. But I can be very compassionate. But when I talk to them, I'm like, young lady, tell me what's going on. Because we had a little girl, and she was 13. Her mom and daddy were fighting so bad through their divorce. She felt like they completely had no idea. And I remember she ran, and they were so busy fighting. She was supposed to be at Mama's house. They didn't know for 18 hours that she wasn't in the house. And then it became, when they went to the police station, it became, well, it's her fault. No, it's his fault. It was her. She found another woman who took her in, babied her, petted her, and then sold her. And that little girl came in front of me at 13 years old And when I started questioning her about it, she wouldn't talk to police, but suddenly she got, because I kept saying, you are special. Somebody loves you. Your mom and dad's lost their mind. When she realized, she said, you don't think they're right? I said, no, I think you're right, and you're hurt. She went to weeping, told us who it was, because she wouldn't tell the police. But she was pregnant as she stood in front of me. So, if you can't do anything else, pray for us that are dealing with this stuff, that we will have the eyes to see what we need to see. But if you know anywhere that you feel like these people come in contact with kids and this might raise their awareness to be just a little bit, we're happy to come and talk to you. If you see something, say something, call the hotline, and they will track that down. Now, Horry County has the highest rate of, and I want to say it's because we're trying to educate as much, they have the highest rate of phone calls into the hotline, making reports, because people are becoming educated. And I don't care if 1 out of 50 is valid, at least we've got that one. Okay? All right. Thank y'all so much for having us. I apologize for keeping you late, but thank you so much.
And before we end, we just want to introduce Shelbia. Shelbia works at Engaging Minds Service. I want you to present a little bit about what that is, Shelbia.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Shelbia Wiley, and I'm a member of the Coastal Region Human Trafficking Task Force. My position on the task force is interfaith, so I work with churches of all denominations to educate them about human trafficking. I do have a nonprofit in Conway, South Carolina, and it's called Engaging Minds Services. We provide services for victims of human trafficking. We provide counseling, medical. We have what we call a survivor package, and thank you for all the donations that you've given us. In that survivor package, we provide all kinds of toiletries and 1 change of clothes, and we provide those packages to law enforcement. Sometimes we try to give them at least 5 at a time, all the stations, because when they come in contact with victims, they can give them that package. Sometimes it's overnight, sometimes they send them back to their states or bring them here. So those are some of the things that we offer at Engaging Minds. We have a big project we're working on now, and that project is to provide housing. That is one thing we do not have in Horry County or Georgetown County. It's a place, or temporary housing, a place for the victims to go if they're rescued. We have to send them out of state, sometimes out of county, and so we're working on that project now. We have an opportunity to open up 22 rooms, which would be 44 beds. It's a very costly project that we're working on, and we're asking the community for donations to help us. If you want to adopt a room, you can adopt a room for $8,000. Because that'll provide everything that victim, or 2 victims per room, that they would need during that time. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for your invitation, and it's just been truly a blessing. You're welcome.
Thank you, ladies, for coming out, and just thank you for all you're doing for our community. And thank you guys for coming tonight, especially on a Friday night. And just remember, as they said, we all have a part to play in combating human trafficking, and don't think that you can't do anything. So thank you guys. Have a good night.